Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Very excited to present Chevy Stevens tonight for Starfest. I'm Michelle Steinhusen. I'm the director for the Starfest St. Albert Readers Festival this year. And we are really privileged to be sharing these amazing authors and stories from the St. Albert Public Library, which sits on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. This is a virtual event, but we do want it to be an interactive event. So please, throughout the discussion, put your comments, put your questions in the chat. You're going to want to change your chat settings so that they say everyone, not just host and panelists. And I have the other Michelle with me, and she's going to be keeping track of the chats. And also, if anybody has any issues with the tech, they can just put that in the chat and Michelle will help you. So before I bring in Chevy and Jana, I just wanted to say, if you haven't had a chance to purchase Chevy's new book, Dark Roads, which is excellent, you can get it at the independent bookstores, Audrey's Books and Glass Bookshop. We've got the links there in the chat as well. That'll take you straight to the bookstore. And also you can always take the books out of the library. So I am going to bring in the people we're actually here to see. So here we go. Welcome, Chevy. I see you and I hear you. And welcome, Jana. I see you and I hear you too. This is great. It's always good when the technology actually works. So let me introduce everybody to our guests here today. So I've got this big, I've got it all written down because I tend to go by the seat of my pants and that doesn't always work very well. So Chevy Stevens grew up on a ranch on Vancouver Island, and she still lives on the island with her husband and daughter. For most of her adult life, she worked in sales, first as a rep for a giftware company and then as a realtor. While holding an open house one afternoon, she had a terrifying idea that became the inspiration for Still Missing. Chevy eventually sold her house, left real estate so she could finish her book. I always find it amazing how people get to become authors, what they were doing before they got to this. Still Missing went on to become a New York Times bestseller and winner of the International Thriller Writers Award for Best First Novel. When she isn't working on her next book, she's hiking with her 2 dogs on her favorite mountain trails and spending time with her family. Chevy's current obsessions are vintage Airstreams, which is very cool, all things mid-century modern, Hollywood memoirs, stand-up comedians, not necessarily in that order. Her books, including Those Girls, which Stephen called incredibly scary, have been published in more than 30 countries and optioned for film. Dark Roads is her 7th novel and was just announced as one of Indigo's top 10 books of 2021. And who better to interview a thriller author than a true crime writer? Jana Pruden is an award-winning feature writer at the Globe and Mail. She is the former crime bureau chief of the Edmonton Journal and now also a sessional journalism instructor at MacEwan University. Her story, Fear on the Farm, was named to Slate's Best Crime Writing in 2013. In 2019, it was released in book form by Hingston and Olsen Publishing, and it's just beautiful. I actually took a look at the book, and it is gorgeous. Her 2018 feature, After the Fire, was named a best article on long form and was chosen as one of long form's best crime stories for 2018. I am going to hand things over to the very, very capable Jana, and she and Chevy are going to thrill us this evening, I'm very sure. So once again, please put your questions and your comments in the chat and enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and hello, everybody. It is such a pleasure to have you all with us tonight. I thank you all for taking time out of your life to join us, and of course to the St. Albert Public Library for hosting this event. I feel like getting to connect with people over great distances to talk about books and writing has really been one of the bright spots of this pretty difficult time. As Michelle said, we're going to be in conversation a little bit. I'm a journalist. I always have a million questions to ask, but we'd love to be able to put your questions to Chevy as well. So please don't be shy, jump into the comments, and I will put them to her as we go along. Hello, Chevy. It's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So typically when I talk books with people, I don't always like to get too in depth about the book because I assume a lot of people who are here tonight, or some of them at least, haven't read it. And I think that's particularly true with not wanting to give away anything from Dark Roads. There's a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, it's hard to speak about it without accidentally spoiling things, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But I wonder if you can maybe start off by telling people who haven't read it and maybe don't have a copy yet, what is this book about?
Sure. In short, it's about a young girl who runs away from a really awful home life, and she intends to run away, but inadvertently fakes her disappearance on the Cold Creek Highway, which is this long stretch of highway set in BC, not based on, but I always say influenced by the Highway of Tears. And it's about, so it's her story, and then it intersects with a woman whose sister is actually a victim of that highway. And it's their two stories and how they converge.
So you mentioned the Highway of Tears
Yes.
Being an influence. And of course, that's what a lot of us think about when we think about sort of a deadly, sinister highway. Can you talk a little bit about how that real life situation turned into inspiration for a book, or influenced?
Yeah. Well, and you probably find this too when you're writing, although you are actually trying to be factual, whereas I have some leeway. If something doesn't work for me, I can just change it. But there's never one specific source. Usually it's a merging of a few happenings that have happened, that have triggered something in me. At the time that I had already thrown out 2 books, I couldn't find anything that I was really grasping. And if I don't feel intensely about something, I can't write intensely about it. So the Highway of Tears, being from BC, there is other highways that are notorious across the world for being dangerous to women or people, but usually women. And but the Highway of Tears really resonates. It's affected all of us. We've all heard of it. I don't think you can't go to that website and see those pictures and that billboard without feeling just that. It's really haunting and very, very sad. And if you do look into the history, it's shockingly awful how many years it went on. And but I didn't want to base my novel on the actual victims and the actual cases. Out of respect is a big issue. Also, the history of the Highway of Tears is very convoluted. At one point I did think, well, maybe I should just face it and just call it the Highway of Tears and just have a fictional person. But it got difficult. The Highway of Tears thankfully hasn't had any new victims for like 10 years. But there also has never been one person who was the culprit, nor was anybody ever caught, actually, except the last person who was convicted, I think, for 3 murders. So there's a lot of that. So that obviously, it's an awful tragedy within Canada that it is predominantly Indigenous women. A lot of that is because of the nature of where it is. It's remote. They don't have the transportation isn't as available in those areas. And then at that time, the policing, RCMPs weren't as in touch. They didn't have the same things. It wasn't discussed. And so I did want to raise all that issues and bring it up without making it my issue, because again, not being First Nations, I couldn't write from a First Nations perspective. That wouldn't be, I don't feel that that's respectful. And so I wanted to bring it. And then also it timed with, there was a couple cases on the island of men actually who went missing, and their family were looking for them. And so it tied in with how awful to just not know where they are. I mean, like, to just really feel that, to not know where your loved one is and to want to bring them home. And, you know, so it tied in with all that, and also all the media and how everybody, not the media is bad, how everybody feels an ownership of the case. When these things blow up, they really become invested in it. And I thought I wanted to explore how it would feel to be a family member and have everybody feel like they know your loved one, and or your loved one becomes part of a bigger problem and they maybe lose their own specific identity. So all of those just kind of entwined. Also the Me Too movement, I wanted to explore of power, authority figures, and the destructive power they can have, especially on young girls. And so it all wraps in. So, you know, I took the concept of the highway, and then I was able to use it to talk about a lot of things that I personally wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So what is your process that you go through when you're starting to think about a new book? And so you have an idea, how do you go from there?
It probably sounded like a bit of a shotgun approach for the way I just wrote it. I take a little of this and a little of that. No, you know, it's been a bit different with every book. I think it's kind of like whatever gets you there with that one. I'd like to say I have a specific formula, but I don't. I kind of learned that it's a lot of trial and error, trial and error. I try something, I don't. Typically, the biggest issue for me is to try to come up with a good premise, because well, especially 7 books in, I can't do something that I've already done, and then also what everyone else is already doing. Or if I do, I have to, of course, make it fresh. And ideas, like I write tons of ideas down, but a good idea does not a book make. And you can, I'll begin to start working the idea, and I talk to my editor and I'll pitch a concept, you know, a premise, and she'll be like, yeah, I like that. We might have several conversations, and then I might even send her early drafts, like my first 50, or, you know, I'll be like, how do you feel? Like, is this the right voice style? You know, how are you feeling? Do you hate it? You know, or what happened? This last book took me about 4 years, but the book actually only took me 2 years. I spent 2 years on the wrong books. I'm a slow writer. Good thing I don't have the same deadlines that you probably face, because I can pick away at a paragraph forever and then hate it and then throw it out. But so I would say what it's condensed down to now is that I have to find a really strong premise. And in my case, that's scary. If it's not scary, the rest just kind of falls apart on me. And then it really evolves. It's like, who's going to be the people who tell it? And I really just feel my way through a lot. And then a lot's instinct. At a certain point, you just sort of learn the art of story. And it's just really this really long process. That's why it's hard to describe to some people. It's sort of like, I just keep doing it until my editor says I'm done. That's my process. And then I hope people like it.
Were there challenges in, you know, given that there is a real world situation that is similar to what you're writing about, and it's obviously, as you pointed out, you know, it has a lot tied into it. You were saying you would feel disrespectful, you know, to approach it in certain ways. So how did you navigate, I guess, respectfully representing something that is influenced by a real thing that has, you know, a lot of weight to it?
I had a lot of hesitancy because you can't make, you know, you're gonna, no matter what you do, somebody's not gonna be happy. But as a whole, I certainly didn't want to be disrespectful. And I figured as long as I did my best, then I can know that I tried my best to be as respectful. And I could at least say, I really tried to get it right. Like, so it was conversations with my editor. It was just really trying to walk the line, trying to be very aware. You know, in the beginning, I wrote a prologue. So I wanted to address the history of this area, but I also took like a cross section of what could have happened. Like I picked one person who lived in a small town on that highway. So I didn't use the entire case, and that I didn't attempt to try to solve the highway of tears, and then for my own way, I weave in things that, that mean things to me. Like I have about the women, and I have the women talking to the women. And so I guess, I don't know, I just tried to be really delicate and really careful. And I have noticed, like I watch reviews, and as a whole, a lot of people haven't been aware of it. I also wrote a letter at the end to explain why I chose to fictionalize the town and fictionalize the highway itself and everything else. So I did address that, but there's been a lot of people who weren't aware of it, and it certainly doesn't absolve the issue, but it does bring quite a larger group of people who weren't aware of it, and acknowledgement and awareness is a percentage of getting there, I would hope, of the wider picture of it all. And yeah, so and I was concerned, but I've actually heard from a few First Nations readers who really liked it and were glad for me to honor the voices, and they weren't offended. So that was good. I was happy about that.
Yeah, it's interesting how a fictional story can sometimes expose truth, a true story, in a different kind of way,
a more user-friendly way, I guess. I don't know if you want to say it that way, but maybe somebody might not have sought out a book about the Highway of Tears, but they read a fictionalized version that may make them be more aware and look into it more too.
Mm-hmm. There's a question that's been asked by the audience, and something that I'm interested in as well. The audience member is asking why you think we're fascinated with crime thrillers and true crime. And I guess I'd put even a finer point on that, crime has been enduringly popular subject for since some of the original cave drawings.
I know. Was it the lion or the mammoth that did it?
Exactly. And I think especially we do actually see that with women, that women make up a very large percentage of true crime and fictionalized crime audiences, and that there's actually many of the most respected crime writers are women. So I'd love to hear your thought about this fascination in general, and also I guess the role of women in there.
Yeah, sure. I get asked that a lot, and it's always been a bit challenging to answer because I'm not 100% sure if there's one blanket reason. I do know that crime fiction is the top selling of all, not all books. I think romance is second, which I also love. So it is definitely widespread. I think the type of fiction, though, that women are drawn to, this is a generalization, is more emotion based, though. I think the type of fiction that men might be more interested in tends to be more, there's the spy, there's the hero, or very alpha male who will solve it. And I think women are drawn to books where there's the vulnerable and the underdog who beats evil. I think there's a lot of, we want to win, and we want not win, maybe get our power back, and in novels, that's a way we can do that. And I saw this TikTok recently, and this guy it was a joke about how women listen to true crime podcasts because we're looking for ways to get away with things. And almost every woman in the comments was like, no, we're trying to figure out how to not get caught. Like, we're trying to not be the victim, not to get away with it. This is our reality. We listen to it and we hear it because it's speaking for us. It's speaking of our fears or making us aware. Like, you read those podcasts and you go, okay, so maybe I don't go to a Craigslist alone. So I think it's, also, I think we just like, you see with campfire stories and everything. I think everybody likes that little shiver. It's a little shiver of excitement, the darkness. I'm not sure. I have my own personal, I like listening to podcasts because I like the problem solving aspect of it. I like to hear about the detectives and the people who didn't give up, all the people behind the case that will finally solve these things 20 years later. So it's that part that I like. I don't enjoy anything gratuitous around the actual crime. And writing fiction, I'm always aware that I'm writing what's made up, but this is real reality for a lot of people. And so it's a funny thing that I try to go in the midst of. I don't like when people are a little too gratuitous, like, yay, murder. Like, no, that's really happens.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if that answered it.
Yeah, it's an interesting divide in the genre where we see,
Yeah.
so many amazing works of art, whether true stories or fictionalized stories around crime. But then we can also see some things that are extremely sensational. I think of
Yes.
the books that I remember seeing on the book rack when I was a kid in the 80s that, like,
Oh,
Mummy,
yeah.
don't, and the cover would be splattered with blood and
Yeah.
and very,
Or the old
very
yeah. Or the magazines where it was like, it was sexualized, very, like you'd see the girl tied up and the detective going to solve her and the girl's half naked in the chair, like, yeah, that's still around for sure. So yeah, I don't know. It's your own comfort level. I find if it makes me feel a little edgy inside, like, if I'm invited to something that's like maybe like drinks and murder, I'm like, no, I just can't quite do that one. I think because I've immersed myself in so many podcasts, and you have to be completely heartless to not see the effect that this has on people in real life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. People often ask me if I listen to My Favorite Murder, and I've never listened to it because I find
Neither
the
have
name
I.
so repulsive that I
Yes.
can't.
Me
like,
too. And this isn't not a disparaging, because it's a successful podcast. People really enjoy it, and power to them. But same, I have absolutely had a complete wall come up with me that I can't describe anything as my favorite murder. Like I just can't. Like I just can't. That somebody really happened. Like yeah. It's like Titanic. I swear I was the only person in that movie theater who was like, you're enjoying this? Like, people are talking about special effects, and I'm like, dude, it's 1,500 people. Like, so yeah, I've always had a little hard time shutting off the reality to just delve into it. I mean, I'm as interested as the other person. I follow true crime for sure, but I try not to forget, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where that line of, I guess, responsible creation comes in. I think of that sometimes, that people, if they are drawn to a crime story, and I think we really naturally are, but sometimes people feel really guilty about it because they feel like that's some kind of bloodlust or
Voyeuristic, like it's
Yes.
voyeuristic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always think in certain situations with unethically created things or irresponsibly creative things, that definitely can be the case. But so much of crime writing exposes, I think, so many truths about humanity, as you said, exposes real risks and how people survive them and navigate the world.
And all the people that we take for granted who are out there actually solving all of these for real. There's some amazing people. I'm sorry, my dog is what? Sorry. I'm not sure what he's trying to say, but he's got a few things to add. Go away.
It's funny, maybe this happens to you as well. I often meet people and they're like, a crime reporter, you must love serial killers. And I'm always like,
God. No.
That's, I really don't.
Yes, that's on my bucket list. Meet one. No.
Yeah.
I'm not sure anybody said, but people they do assume that I read a lot of true crime, which I actually, I have, but I'm not reading thrillers every night. Like I need a break from that. Myself, I'm not a dark person. I think I tend to be analytical. And so I like the problem solving of how they pieced these things together. I like that. Like if I'm a huge podcast fan, you and I were talking about that before we went on record here. And I only like the ones that are solved. I can't read. I'm like, wait, and they didn't find out who did it. Like, so I think we like that good and bad, and this feeling that it's all going to be, worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a note from Joanne, who says, Joanne Root, for me, it's all about the puzzle. Can I gather all of the clues in order to solve the crime? That sounds very similar to you as well, Chevy.
Yeah. And I just find it fascinating. Some of these detectives who, I think one of the men, I think it's Paul Holes, who worked the, oh gosh, I'm blanking now. He's the famous one, the Atlanta serial killer there. He kept that like box of documents, and he, from like starting as this sort of detective through, department to department to department, and he dragged it with him over and up until they finally figured out this new way of doing DNA where they can backtrace through cousins, aunts, uncles. Exactly why I do not have my DNA online, by the way. But they can do all that, and what I admire is the tenacity to do that. That's incredible. To me, those are the heroes. Like, absolutely.
Yeah. Here's Michelle, the Golden State Killer. Exactly. And
I knew it was something. Well, there's a lot of them.
Yeah. We're definitely seeing a lot of that right now with this ancestral DNA. We just had a case in Alberta where they haven't solved the homicide, but the victim has been unidentified, I believe since the 70s. And because his body was found extremely degraded and mutilated. And so they had his DNA in a cupboard all these years, all these decades, and recently were able to at least identify the victim, which presumably is a big step towards killer. And giving someone, it's talk about insensitive, this person's nickname in the media with police all over the place was Septic Tank Sam for many.
Oh gosh, I thought it was gonna be something like No Name Joe.
I mean, like close, but he was found in a septic tank.
Oh, that's much more descriptive. Oh God.
Yes. I think hopefully police and media, responsible media, have gotten better about things like that. That's some policing and media black humor, but I think being able to restore someone their name and hopefully take a step towards solving it.
There's an entire website, I can't remember, it's DNA Doe or Doe DNA, something like that, and it's a bunch of people who've kind of banded together to solve all these by DNA and by the familial matches, and they have a lot of volunteers who will go through, like the amount of people they have to go through to narrow it down. And they do a lot of crowdsourcing because I guess it's very expensive, which is people don't necessarily realize. And so they'll take this person, then everyone gets together, and I think it's fantastic, as they're bringing these people home, or at least giving them a name and putting them, that's, I think, very important, of course.
I would imagine there's some people out there who got away with a murder at some point in the past who are pretty nervous when their cousin's like, oh, I'm getting my DNA done.
Right? Are you sure? I've heard things about those sites. I know. I always think that too, like, because of course everything changes so much. I do wonder how many people who've gotten away with stuff are like, oh,
yeah,
I knew I shouldn't have used that blanket. Like, definitely
trying to convince their cousin, like, actually, no, you don't want to go on.
Yeah, you really don't want to do DNA. Really don't. The FBI uses that for all kinds of stuff.
Couple interesting comments here from Anita Ref. She says the psychology of it all is what holds me, wanting to understand why people do the things they do. Is that part of a driver for you as you're
psychology, the understanding of it, I like, emotions. I mean, I guess I'm not sure. I mean, you probably heard about the Gabby Petito case. I think everyone is, and we're all, very vested in that. And I think it's a lot of, I think the natural drive to want an answer. I think, the what happened, the who, the when. I think it's like mysteries over and over. We want the resolution. And personally, I like the psychology. I like the emotions of it. All of, I do.
I think on the flip side, something really interesting, and this isn't giving away any secrets because it's the first couple of pages, wanting to understand why people do the things they do. In the beginning of the book, you put yourself into the position of a victim.
Yes.
And you're placing yourself in understanding what it is like to have that done to you. Do you want to talk at all about that? I mean, it's quite intense, even to put yourself in that kind of position.
Yeah. Yeah, there's certain I am a slow writer, and one of those reasons is because it's not exactly easy to put yourself there to do that. For me to write accurately, I have to feel it, at least that first draft, and then I can fiddle, but I have to be very raw. And yeah, I think that's many writers have a strong amount of empathy, but I think that's also makes us more susceptible to pain. Like if I watch certain I can't just shut it off. I can't just go, wow, sucks to be them, click. I will feel it. That's why I don't watch the news, and I have to keep sort of a bit of a window between me and whatever it is, because I will feel that. And so yeah, initially that prologue was written from more of a distant perspective, because I was trying to figure out a way to get all that sort of history and the real essence of that highway as a place, as an evil place, to do it in a way that wasn't an info dump during the story. So I tackled it as a prologue, and initially it was very distant, very like more of a news sort of perspective, and it didn't ring with that same emotional feeling that you need. So that first line kind of just came to me, and this woman speaking, and I think it's something to do with like, nobody wakes up thinking they're going to die on the Coal Creek or a highway that night or something. I can't even remember my own line, but I've written a lot of lines. So
okay, can I just read that
yeah,
first line since we talked about it? No one ever wakes up thinking I'm going to die on a dark road tonight, but that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's the point of the tragedy. If we knew, we wouldn't do it. So that's why it's a tragedy. But yeah, so I found that voice and that person, and then the prologue came much easier for me after that, and it really resonated. And then there's an epilogue that matches the prologue. And again, that was very raw and very real to me. And I actually didn't really inadvertently realize, but I've had a few letters from people who had recently lost family members and found my epilogue really comforting to them. So when people write me that, it means more to me than somebody's, of course I want people enjoying the book, but when people say that it touched them personally, then that makes me feel like I'm doing something more than just entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from Michelle. I think this is a really good question. What do you think of citizen crime solvers? Sometimes they help, but not always. And I'm going to put in a plug here for a piece I recently read by Catherine Laidlaw about a child who disappeared in Newfoundland, and a cadre of, internet detectives has become convinced that the family did something, and it's certainly
right. Oh yes,
case.
Yes, I've read that, but they've gotten quite
aggressive,
really cruel to that family.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
Like they're not following the normal boundaries that like a cop would, or actually they've become very aggressive. I've read that about that. Maybe I read your article. I don't know, but that was yeah.
Not my article, but yeah. So what's your position on citizen crime fighters?
I think they're cool, but you got to remember, you're not a cop. You don't have all the information. I get frustrated when I read, Twitter, and I'm checking out whether they found Brian Laundrie today or whatever. And there's these people are like, well, the cops are idiots. Well, no, they probably aren't just telling you everything. Of course they're not, they can't, so yes, they probably know what they're doing. But in the same sense, if something's been cold for however long, then sure, I think that banding can certainly pressure maybe people to reopen things. I think a lot of highlighting, there's another couple of cases where that's happened, where renewed or podcast has put so much more pressure on the scenario that the cops have gone, okay, we'll get back in there. And so that I think can be positive. But I think when you're actually messing with the families and going aggressive and against them, then no, because unless you're God, you don't really know.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but I think sure, like there's that one about there's the Iceland woman, Ice Valley. They've been trying to solve who she was forever, and there's intense Facebooks, and I think that's cool. Problem solving, sure, they can. It's really neat, but when they start actually messing with people, then yeah, that's not so cool.
Mhm. I do wonder. I think there's times where that citizen crime solving probably drifts into like looking at it as though it's a puzzle, an entertaining puzzle to solve. I know sometimes victims, families that I've dealt with, that it can be really hurtful to see in the comments under like, oh, well, she was, so even if the people aren't directly harassing the family, but to see it being talked about as though it's a murder mystery and not a real person can be pretty difficult for people.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just some fascinating thing. And yes, agree.
Another question. Do you ever think about writing something other than thrillers, but please keep writing them?
I do a lot. And I think that's also because writing one book is such a long process. One of the ways I amuse myself is by thinking of other ideas, other premises, other plots. But it takes me a significant amount of time to write one book, let alone, like, I know people who can write two at once. I cannot. I wish I could, because boy, would I like, that'd be awesome. But not as long as my daughter's at home and stuff. That's just not going to happen. And I like naps and I like my own life too. So, but yes, I do. And I keep a little notebook of all these ideas that maybe one day, I like fantasy quite a bit. I'd really like to write. I grew up reading fantasy, and I was in the Pittsburgh Museum and I saw this painting, and it was this kid. I think he had a firefly in a glass, and it was something about the daydreams of like kids, like fantasy. And I was like, why am I not writing fantasy? Like, just at the moment, like that's all I read. And then I went into Ed McBain. So maybe that's where it went off. But yeah, so definitely, I know that I have a strong component in me of the love of the fantastical. So I think at one point that will happen. So I have a few, they're in my little notebook online, where I'll just jot down cool ideas or things that I find interesting. So fantasy would be one. I've thought about kids stuff too, but I always feel like it'll end up taking a dark turn. Like the Teddy gets all like crazy.
That's right. The toy box.
Yeah, I'll be like, this is boring. And then the Teddy went missing. So.
A question from Luis. What do you think it is about northern countries that inspires so many thriller writers?
There's a few things. I think they're very atmospheric. It's not just us. It's like, like movies like or those series like Top of the Lake, or very desolate. And, it's just very, I like a lot of the British stuff. Like Detective Jimmy Perez, they're all set on like the moors, and they're always very barren, and there's just so much atmosphere, which really add to it. I mean, I think it's a beautiful sunshiny day. It just doesn't, I don't know. It's like, and then they travel through the forest. I don't know, it doesn't seem as scary, right? So atmosphere also, reality is like those very northern and or remote areas, bad people can get away with doing bad things a lot easier. Nowadays, it's pretty darn hard to avoid cameras, and they can track so-and-so stopped there, then they went there, and then they did this, and then they turned on that corner, and then they used this bank machine. They can get you really easily. So I think the remoteness, there's of course, especially in so much less police force. Some of these small towns might have 4 or 5 policemen that are doing an entire area. So of course, that's why this highway, I mean, of course, nobody was patrolling it back and forth every day. And there's like 1,000 areas, not to give anybody ideas. But, I think the remoteness allows for privacy. If you have nefarious ideas, that's the...
Yeah, I took an emergency road trip up that highway when those 2 teenagers were on the run having...
That was awful.
And I can confirm it was extremely creepy. That was right in the middle of...
It's got a bad vibe. It's got
it was bright all the time. very desolate, and people were very, very scared. And it was
certain places just have an energy. They just do. Like when I was in real estate, I could walk in certain houses and I'd be like, ooh, bad mojo, like, you know. And it's just, I'm not saying the north is creepy, but there you definitely know it might not be necessarily safe to be out rambling around on those roads. That was awful. That was a really upsetting case for sure.
Here's a get you nice and
my dog has a heart attack. Okay, what were we talking about?
That dog has great like thriller timing though.
Yeah, he's an alarmist though. That's my dog Ziggy. I have Una, who's also super chill, but Ziggy likes to think it's his job to scare the whenever he can. Usually right when I'm doing something intense.
Perfect. So question from Eva, how did you switch from sales to writing? What did it take? Writing courses or workshops? Tell us a little bit about that change.
Well, I'm really obsessive, which is a good thing when you're turning. You probably are too. You probably, I think a journalist, you stay on top of something and just all the way down, right? So I think you have to have that real tenacious nature. So for me, I've always been a huge reader, always loved reading, art, you know, all that. But I went into sales, you know, like most people, got jobs, started making money, had a house. And then I think I just never really had anything I wanted to write about, like, and then I was at an open house and I started having this idea, and it was along the same time that I said to my aunt, I think I was supposed to be a writer. And she said, well, you know, you're never too late. And then it was just like, it sounds really hokey, but it was like a big destiny sort of feeling all of a sudden where, you know, I made a vision board and called into like, this is what I want to do. I'm not happy and I want to do something different. And then it was like every movie I saw had a writer, and then every book, it was like, oh, cool, you're a writer too. And then, you know, I went on a vacation on this remote island and I was writing, and there was like rain on the roof. And of course I was like, this is so romantic. This is totally what it would be like to be a writer every day. No, but anyways, so I had this idea and I just heard it and I really wanted to tell that story. And I was single, and it was like, I didn't have a child, and I was in my early 30s. And so I was like, I was going to do it. So I did everything you're not supposed to do. I sold my house. I lived on savings for a couple years. In my case, though, you can't just bang off a book and think you're amazing. I hired a freelance editor. I went to conferences. I joined online forums. I did the Blue Book of Grammar 350 times until I had everything memorized, even though did great in high school. It had been 20 whatever years. I taught myself to type on the Mavis Beacon CD, you know, like I got every book you could on writing, and I studied them like they're my Bible. So I immersed, you know, and then I got feedback and I continued making my craft better and better. And then the freelance editor I worked with knew my agent, and he read it and he liked it and he signed it. And then I got my first 3-book deal with St. Martin's Press, who I'm still with. I've been with my same agent, my same editor for 13 years. Yeah, so I've been lucky that way too.
And another question, who are your favorite authors, thriller and otherwise?
Oh, that's always hard because I just read so many, like my favorite authors are my friends. So like my favorites are like, you know, my buddies, or my Canadian friends too, like Jennifer Hillier, Robin Harding, Rosnay, you know, in the US, Carla Buckley is my bestie. So of course they're my favorites. I don't read a lot of thrillers. Like we talked about before, I don't want to write that all day and then in the evening read that as well. Plus, I have a harder time separating to read I will read them if I'm actually looking for craft. If I'm trying to read to just get lost in the story, those don't really work for me, but I can read them to go, oh, I really like how she did that opening there. Oh, I see. Okay. But you know, Ed McBain was one of my favorite for police procedurals. He had over 80 books, I think, in his career, but I have all my little faded 50-cent copy ones. modern day writers, I have a huge writer crush on Taylor Jenkins Reid. She did Daisy and the Six and that new Malibu Rising, and she has a very nostalgic sort of writing. So she's my current favorite. I read a ton of romance, but I couldn't tell you the titles or names because I read so many of them. They just blend. They're like Off Campus #1 or Cross Billionaire to the Through.
And we were talking about crime podcasts before. You were saying you're a fan of podcasts. Any podcasts like recommend people that?
Well, I do Dateline a lot, but there's some really good series ones, like Lisk was a really good one. That's the Long Island. There's another one I think called In the Red Clay. It's all about the Dixie Mafia, which I had no idea it was even a thing. And then this one guy who's telling, that they're interviewing a lot has that accent. And I swear I was like full on Dixie by the time I was done listening. But that was really, really riveting. There's another detective, Ron Iddles. And when you listen to detectives talk on these podcasts, you can see why there's the really good ones are so good at what they do, because they have this certain pattern to their speech. It's very lulling. You're like, oh, so that's how you got that confession. In the Red Clay List, The Syndicate was a really interesting one about drugs, about marijuana grow-ops and the black market. And I like those binging ones.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I would like the ones like Snapped, where it's like women do bad things.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen you describe this as a survivalist thriller. And by this, of course, I mean your new book, Dark Roads, which I happen to have handy right here, as a survivalist thriller and a survivalist coming of age story. Can you talk a little bit about that element of survivalism?
Sure. Well, another aspect is for myself, I get pretty bored of doing the standard serial killer. I like action, but I didn't want action to mean this girl is being chased by a serial killer 400 however many pages. And that usually racks up body count. And I'm not really a big fan of Slaughterfest books. For myself, that's just not. So I've been really trying to experiment with new ways of creating fear and adrenaline and atmosphere and creepiness, and this girl ended up, by the nature of I needed her to be able to survive and make herself missing, so I had to create a backstory with her where that would be possible. That is not me at all. People often ask, oh, no. My husband goes fishing. He's a guy who thinks it's really awesome to go wading into cold creeks to like fish and stuff. So I just asked him. I admire it. I admire anybody who's totally willing to do that. But like, I grew up in a ranch. I like nice linens and a pool. So, but it was fun to write. It was fun to write a character, and her dog Wolf. That's not a secret. He's my most popular character I think I've ever written. People might give like the book a low review, but they'll be like, but I really love the dog. So apparently I'm like a master dog writer and I didn't know it.
There you go.
Dog series coming.
Yeah. Well, I saw you mention in an interview I read of yours, Jean M. Owl and the Clan of the Cave Bear series.
Yes.
It's funny, I also was a childhood Clan of the Cave Bear series. I'm sure maybe some of you watching today, you could give us a little hands up if you're a Clan of the Cave Bear.
E.C. Andrews, Clan of the Cave Bear. It was all a big thing around that time.
My local little free library in my neighborhood, I check it every time I'm walking my dog. The other day I open it and it's like the whole series, literally taking the whole top shelf.
Wow. You're like, oh.
Am I just going, I'm going to spend the whole winter, back in.
Who was willing to let all those go? They're probably like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So
those are amazing. Like the world building, I am so admiring of people who write that, like Tolkien. I mean, the world building is just incredible. But when you're like 12 years old reading that, it was confusing. But it was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just bonus points for whoever can put the lead character's name in the chat box fastest. Me and Chevy know it for sure, but anyone out there who remembers what her name is, you can have.
Also remember who played her in the movie.
Oh, I don't think I ever saw the movie.
Yeah, I don't think I did either. I typically don't. If I've read the book, I usually don't do the
Oh,
movie. But
Daryl Hannah, of course. That's
so I know
okay.
that one.
I think it's Ayla, not Anya. Is that correct?
I think it was Ayla too.
I think it's Ayla.
Yeah, something like that.
We'll have to look that up.
Those were their books.
Do you have a new book, like, or a new idea that you could share?
Yeah, I'm working on one. I always hesitate to jinx myself because my books do change so much. Like for the longest time on my website, it said my 7th book was set in Seattle. And it was like, I'm like, oh, actually, no. Okay, so she's 17. She lives in northern BC now. Like my stuff does change a lot, but something I'm doing with my current one, which is new for me, is I'm setting it in the late 70s, 1976, which was actually, I picked that year because it was the lead up to the Montreal Olympics. So it's a good time to set something. I like nostalgia. So I wanted a chance to be in that. And also, you can commit crimes better in the 70s than you can now. And I just did a book with somebody on the run, and you got to get them all getting rid of cell phones, and you got to explain why they couldn't just call for help. Like all these things, like what, nobody saw them on a camera? Like, so it gets so hard to get people to get away with things. So I'm like, fine, we'll just get rid of all of the possible impediments. And so it's been interesting for me just to research that. Like I had, RCMP, like I didn't realize that female RCMP officers weren't in the force until like 1974, I think. And then that they had to wear skirts for decades. I'm like, wait, what? Like, and it wasn't that long ago, really. So that's been interesting for me, but it's currently titled Just Drive. And it's basically a younger couple carjack a married couple on an RV trip they were taking an RV trip to the Olympics, and they end up getting hijacked by a younger couple on the run. So I call it a home invasion on wheels. So picture a retro Winnebago with some really crazy people. And it wasn't influenced about the case that happened in here, but you could see how that can actually happen.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that sounds like a really fascinating.
Yet again, I ruin another summer for someone.
That's right.
All these really good thrillers always take place in the summer. It was a hot day, really, really hot. Probably shouldn't have been on the road.
Well, I think that's bringing us pretty close to our time. If there's any last minute questions in the chat, throw them into the chat box now. I do have a final question about that research process. So when you're thinking about, going back in time to the 70s or to a different period, how do you go about your world building?
Yeah, well, it's been really interesting for me because this has been a new event. So some of it I've been a bit frustrated because I'm like, oh, wow, how do I know that? Like, I'm not a journalist. So I'm like, I have to like seek it out. But like on eBay, I bought maps from the 70s. I do have a few police sources, and one of them, he started in like the 70s. So I'm going to be quizzing him. I do a lot of so much online research, reading old newspapers, documents. I look up small things like pop culture of the 70s. So you can one thing I've learned about setting a book in the past, as I've read the ones where they're trying to make it so clear it's in the past that they're like name dropping certain things all the time. It's like, I was drinking my orange cream soda that only came in the double hubba jubba when I watched Farrah Fawcett and the Charlie's Angels. And it's like, okay. So I'm trying to walk that line. So, pop culture, what did they wear? I looked at old pictures of people camping just to give me that atmosphere feeling. I may have a female police officer in this one who speaks. I'm not sure yet. So I've been reading up on just what it was like for that. So immersion online, lots of online. I order books. Yeah.
So speaking of ordering books, a good time to plug the fact that you can buy this book by Chevy Stevens at your local independent or your online, but we love our independents. Here in Edmonton, Audrey's Books is an amazing place. Glass Bookshop is an amazing place. And of course, your local library, because we love to support our libraries
Yes.
as well.
I was
Is
a
there
huge
anything
library
else?
kid.
Oh yeah, me too. What library did you go to? What was your childhood library?
Well, I'm back in the day when they used to like pull up the van. Like our library was like the mobile library. And I swear I remember the smell of it. It was like the most exciting day to go in on that. So yeah, we just had the little local library. I grew up in a very small town, but the best, my dad would take me there and I would just like, there was no limit. You could just get the amount of books you wanted to get. Like it was, I loved that. I was like, that's predominantly all I did as a kid was read probably.
Yeah, me too. The only problem with libraries, and I still struggle with this, is I sometimes hate to give the book back. But now I'm an adult, I can just buy a copy of the book if I still really want to keep it. But as a kid, I was not great at returning books because sometimes I just love it so much.
You love the look of it, the feel of it. I was really bad at keeping my books. Like I had a really same thing. Like I moved from house to house and I have boxes. I have boxes of books, I think still stored at my mom's house where I'm like, don't give away my books. And I did that recently here where we cleaned out our storage unit and my husband's like, we have 5 or 6 boxes of books. Like, what are they all? And I'm like, my books. But then I went through them. I'm like, maybe I don't need the 1970s Harlequin collection. Like maybe I can pass, but I kept all the ones that really triggered that instant memory, like the certain series. And if you read them now, I can't recapture the feeling, but the look of it and that cover, I will. So I kept those and then I just blessed the other ones and left them off into the world. But it's really neat because when you revisit an old book, you're hit with all the memories of just how much you loved it and what it meant at that time. But try to read them again. You're like, oh.
Yeah, are there any books you can read over and over, or are you one of those people you're like once and done?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know if I think I might have read Power of One a couple times by Bryce Courtney, but no, I'm typically one and done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us to our time. Chevy, thank you. This has been so interesting. It's been so wonderful.
I enjoy coming on your podcast one day to talk to you.
That's right.
I'll be listening to you. I'll be like, I know her.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. And Michelle, I see that you are back to take us home, maybe.
Yes. Well, you guys kept talking about books. So I actually probably clicked stop video a little quicker than I meant to.
Wait, you mean all that really good stuff's not on there?
No, this is all good. Thank you so much. Like I said, the other Michelle is here kind of behind the scenes, and thank you, other Michelle, for helping out today. And we both are thriller fans, true crime fans, and there were a few laughs, like Michelle put on there, the home invasion on wheels did make her laugh out loud. So
that's my tagline.
Yeah, but lots to look forward to. And thank you so much. This was such a interesting, fun, and vibrant discussion. So
thank you.
I'm going to say good night to you both. I'm hoping that in 3 years, did you say 3 or 4 years to write a book, that you'll be back at Starfest? Don't
tell my editors that. I think they're assuming this one's going to be quicker, and I haven't said anything different. And I've been I keep thinking I'm going to get an email one day going, "How's that going?" And I was like, "Really good." And then I'll just keep doing what I do. Yeah, I've taken the pedal off the foot off the pedal a lot in the last few years. This is really just, it stopped being fun for a while. So yeah. Well, and it'll come out when it comes out. You have other things in your life too, It's like a kid. Yeah. Yeah. So this is great. Keep us in mind. I'm so happy we were able to get you. Thank you. And thank you for your awesome questions. They were great. Yeah, I didn't cry once. Yeah. No tears allowed at Starfest. So I'm just going to say a thank you to our funders. So our main funder is the City of St. Albert, and we're funded by the Friends of the St. Albert Public Library, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, the Canada Council for the Arts, and our media sponsors are St. Albert Gazette, T8N Magazine, Edify Magazine, and
everybody who is here, at the end of the festival, you will get a feedback survey with a chance to win a set of all the Starfest books. We want to know what you thought of the events and who you'd like to see at Starfest 2022. Chevy, you actually showed up a few times on the list because we ask every festival, who do you want to see? So that is,
thank you.
that is
I was
why
invited a few times, but it just never worked out because it was always fall and then it was COVID. And then, so that is like Jana said, like having the Zoom, being able to actually interact so much like this is great.
Yeah, you know, of course, we'd love to have everybody in person, but it's also really nice to be able to connect this way too. So, yeah, thank you to you both. And for everybody who's watching, our next Starfest is tomorrow afternoon at 2. It's Morgan Murray being interviewed by Vish Khanna, and Morgan's debut novel, Dirty Birds, is hilarious and ridiculous, and I really encourage you to come and check it out. So I'm going to say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.